Spring 1945. The Third Reich is dying. Cities burn, soldiers surrender, and Hitler's empire is collapsing into dust. But in the chaos of defeat, something vanishes. Tons of Nazi gold, priceless art, and documents that could rewrite history. The Americans search. The Soviets dig. But deep inside the ruins of post-war Europe, a secret British mission begins. It's a hunt cloaked in silence, ordered by London, denied by MI6, and buried for decades under layers of classified files. What were they really after? Treasure or truth? This is the story of the secret British hunt for Hitler's gold, a forgotten chase that led through the shattered heart of Europe, into caves, lakes, and vaults where the ghosts of the Reich still whisper. Before we begin, subscribe and turn on notifications, because what you're about to hear is more than history. It's the story the world was never meant to know. The war was ending, but not with peace, only exhaustion. In April 1945, as Allied forces pushed through the shattered remains of Germany, entire divisions vanished into the forests, convoys disappeared into mountain roads, and trains left Berlin under heavy guard, never to be seen again. Among them was one that British intelligence would later call the Phantom Convoy. It was said to have left the Reich Chancellery in the final weeks of the war, its cars sealed, its route known only to a handful of SS officers. Witnesses claimed it carried crates marked with the Black Eagle of the Third Reich, gold bars, foreign currency, and artwork seized from across occupied Europe. But as the war collapsed, so did the trail. By May, Germany was divided between victors, and the train was gone. To the British, the story first appeared in intercepted cables from the U.S. Office of Strategic Services, mentions of financial transfers and evacuated bullion. But the most intriguing clue came from a captured SS adjutant found near Innsbruck, delirious with fever. In his notebook, investigators discovered a single phrase: "Befehl Carthage, deliver to Eisenstein." No one in London knew what that meant, but it caught the attention of one man, Captain Edward Hainsworth, a 32-year-old linguist and intelligence officer who had spent most of the war decoding German transmissions. Hainsworth had a reputation for patience and an almost dangerous curiosity. When others dismissed the rumors of hidden Nazi treasure as drunken gossip, he saw patterns, movements of trucks through Austria, burned manifests, silenced witnesses. By June, British headquarters in Frankfurt had gathered enough fragments to suspect that something far larger than stolen art was at stake. Rumors circulated that Nazi officials had created secret funds, Black Reichsmarks, to finance an underground network prepared for defeat. If the gold existed, it wasn't just treasure. It was a weapon meant to fund the rebirth of fascism in the shadows. Hainsworth's orders were short: investigate Eisenstein. Report directly to London. No disclosure. He was given a team of 4, a corporal from the Royal Engineers, a driver, an interpreter, and an Austrian art historian named Lotte Kruger, whose knowledge of German archives was unmatched. Their mission had no official name, no paperwork, and no witnesses. But among themselves, they called it the Hunt. Their first lead came from a small village near Munich, where a farmer had reported seeing German trucks dumping crates into an abandoned mine shaft days before the Americans arrived. When the team reached it, the air was foul with decay. Inside, they found wooden remains of crates, some smashed open, filled not with gold but with documents, bank ledgers, shipping manifests, coded correspondence, pages soaked in mold and secrecy. Among them was a letter addressed to Oberst Hans Reiter, signed with the insignia of the SS Economic Office. It referred to the secure transfer of the assets under Befehl Carthage to the Alpine fortress. The phrase appeared again and again: Befehl Carthage. The same word from the adjutant's notebook. When Hainsworth sent the discovery to London, he expected a reply within hours. None came. Days passed. Then a single encrypted message arrived: proceed south. Carthage confirmed. Eisenstein priority. Hainsworth folded the paper and looked out the window of their army truck as it rumbled toward the mountains. He knew now what this meant. The British weren't the only ones searching. Somewhere ahead, through the wreckage of war and the ashes of empire, others were already on the trail of Hitler's missing gold, and not all of them wanted it found. The telegram from London was short, but its implications were vast. Carthage confirmed. For Captain Edward Hainsworth, that single phrase transformed his mission from a quiet investigation into a covert operation sanctioned at the highest levels. Operation Carthage, the name whispered in coded memos and intelligence briefings, always followed by redacted lines, was real. And now he was inside it. They moved south through the fractured landscape of post-war Germany, where every town bore scars of ruin. Burned-out vehicles littered the roads, refugees pushed carts of rubble, and black market traders thrived in the chaos. The Allies called this peace, but Hainsworth saw it for what it was, the grey aftermath of destruction, where secrets could hide more easily than soldiers. At their temporary base near Garmisch, a courier from MI6 arrived under civilian cover. He carried no insignia, only a small envelope sealed with wax. Inside was a single document stamped "Most Confidential." It contained a list of names, former SS officers, industrialists, and bankers, all marked "Suspected in Carthage Network." At the bottom was a handwritten note, "Allied cooperation restricted. American interest high. Avoid duplication." That meant one thing: competition. The Americans had their own treasure hunt. The U.S. Army's Monuments, Fine Arts and Archives Unit, the so-called Monuments Men, had already recovered millions in stolen art. But Carthage wasn't about paintings or sculptures. It was about currency, smuggled bullion, and something even more dangerous, ledgers proving which European banks had helped finance the Nazi war machine. If those documents surfaced, they could ruin reputations from Zurich to London. Lotte Kruger was the first to suspect that the missing gold wasn't hidden in a mine or a vault at all. One evening, as they pored over recovered files in the flickering light of a kerosene lamp, she traced a pattern on a map of Austria. "Look," she said softly, "these transport routes, they all converge near the Salzkammergut region, but not toward the mines, toward the lakes." Her theory was bold. As Allied bombers closed in, Nazi officials used Austria's remote alpine lakes as natural vaults. Crates of gold could be weighted and sunk, impossible to reach without equipment, invisible to the enemy. Hainsworth sent a coded message to London requesting sonar equipment and divers. The response was curt: resources unavailable. Proceed with discretion. That was bureaucratic language for "you're on your own." The next day, while questioning a captured SS driver, they stumbled upon their first undeniable lead. The man spoke little English, but his eyes betrayed him. When Lotte mentioned Eisenstein, he froze. After hours of silence, he whispered through cracked lips, "It wasn't a person, it was a place." Eisenstein, the word that had haunted their reports, wasn't a name, but a code name for a transfer station near the Austrian border. A railway junction used by the Reich's finance office during the final days. "Somewhere between Salzburg and Bad Aussee," the driver said. The convoy had stopped and several wagons were detached. After that, he claimed, the officers vanished. That night, Hainsworth stood by the window of their safe house, staring into the dark outline of the Alps. Somewhere in those mountains, he knew, lay not just treasure but the final, desperate secret of a collapsing empire. But what unsettled him most wasn't the hunt itself. It was the sudden silence from London. His reports were no longer acknowledged. His coded transmissions went unanswered. Operation Carthage, once a mission, was starting to feel like a burial. And the deeper they went, the more it seemed they were chasing not just gold, but the truth someone in London didn't want found. By late summer of 1945, Europe was officially at peace. But in the shadows, a new war had already begun. It was not fought with tanks or rifles, but with ledgers, false passports, and secret bank accounts. The shadow network, as Captain Hainsworth came to call it, was the invisible skeleton of the Reich that refused to die. Everywhere he looked, the same pattern appeared: former SS officers suddenly missing, industrialists reappearing under new names, and trains loaded with industrial machinery crossing into neutral Austria or Switzerland. When he cross-referenced names from the Carthage list, Hainsworth realized many of them were connected to IG Farben, Deutsche Bank, and a cluster of front companies registered in Liechtenstein. The war's financiers hadn't fled. They had simply gone underground. Lotte Kruger helped him decode the records they'd salvaged from the mine. Among the pages of crumbling ledgers, she discovered a cipher, a repeating series of initials and numbers. After days of cross-checking, it revealed an account trail leading to a Zurich bank codenamed Helios. Transfers began in early April 1945 and ended abruptly on April 28th, 2 days before Hitler's death. But what caught Hainsworth's attention wasn't the money. It was the signature. Every transaction bore the same authorization mark, E.H. At first, he assumed it was coincidence. Then the chilling realization struck. His own initials, E.H., had been used as part of the cover identity. Someone, somewhere, was using him as camouflage. The British weren't just hunting gold. Someone was manipulating the hunt itself. The next week, they met a contact in Salzburg, a disillusioned German intelligence officer named Dr. Otto Mertens. He'd been part of the Reich's Economic Directorate and now survived by selling information to the highest bidder. Over cigarettes and black coffee in a bombed-out cafe, he told them the truth about Carthage. Carthage was not one operation, he said. It was a network of men, money, and ideas. It began before the war ended, a plan to preserve Germany's wealth and influence. They called it Die Rückkehr, the return. Gold, art, foreign investments, all hidden. But it wasn't for Hitler. It was for what came after him. Hainsworth pressed for locations. Mertens hesitated, then scribbled 2 names on a napkin, Bad Ischl and Toplitzy. The second one struck Lotte immediately. Lake Toplitz, a deep, isolated body of water surrounded by cliffs, rumored to hold Nazi archives, counterfeit British pounds, and maybe the gold itself. Before they could question Mertens further, the meeting ended abruptly. A burst of gunfire shattered the cafe window. Mertens slumped over the table, blood spreading across the napkin. His killer was gone before they reached the street. They escaped to their truck, the night rain hammering the windshield as they drove into the mountains. Hainsworth gripped the blood-stained napkin, his mind racing. Someone had been watching them. Not German remnants, but professionals. The precision of the hit was unmistakable. As they crossed into the Salzkammergut, Lotte broke the silence. "Edward," she whispered, "if Mertens was right, then we're not the hunters anymore. We're the quarry." He didn't answer. The mountain road twisted upward, the engine straining, fog curling around them like smoke. Ahead lay the lake, dark, still, and endless, and beneath its surface, perhaps, the truth that had already claimed so many lives. The rain had followed them into the mountains, falling in thin, relentless sheets. By the time they reached Bad Ischl, the village seemed deserted, only smoke rising from a few chimneys, the air thick with pine and damp ash. The war had ended, but the fear had not. People spoke in whispers, eyes darting toward strangers. For Captain Hainsworth and his team, the hunt for Hitler's gold had turned into something far more dangerous, a descent into silence. Their contact in the region was Anna Weiss, a Viennese historian who'd survived the Nazi purge by posing as a clerk in the Reich's cultural office. Lotte Kruger had met her once before the war. Now she lived quietly under a false name, tending an abandoned manor on the edge of town. When Hainsworth and Lotte arrived, Anna was already waiting, a lantern in hand, her face half lit by the flicker. "You shouldn't have come here," she said before they'd even spoken. "They're still watching." Inside, the manor smelled of damp wood and old secrets. Files and photographs were stacked across the table, documents Anna had saved from destruction when Vienna fell. She poured them tea but spoke little until the doors were locked and the curtains drawn. "I know about Carthage," she said quietly. "I worked for them without realizing it. The Reich used my department to track art shipments, but that wasn't the real purpose. They used the same routes to move gold, documents, even people." She unrolled a map of Austria across the table. Thin red lines ran like veins through the Alps, converging at one point, Lake Toplitz. "Everything leads there," she whispered. "But not just gold. Something else, something they called Project Morgenröte. Dawn Project." Lotte translated, frowning. Anna nodded. It wasn't treasure. It was a list. Names of collaborators, financiers, even foreign governments that helped fund the Reich. If that list exists, it would destroy more than reputations. It would tear apart alliances. Hainsworth felt a chill. The implications were enormous. If the British government had sanctioned his mission, perhaps it wasn't to recover gold at all, but to control that list before anyone else found it. When he asked where she'd learned of Morgenröte, Anna hesitated, then opened a small chest beneath the table. Inside lay a tattered photograph, a group of SS officers standing beside a train car marked with the Reich Eagle. One face had been circled, a man with cold, intelligent eyes. "This was my husband," she said softly. "He was part of the economic office. He vanished in April 1945. The last thing he told me was that he had orders to secure the Dawn files in the Salzkammergut. If he's still alive, he knows where they are." The room fell silent, except for the rain tapping against the windows. Then from outside, the faint crunch of footsteps on gravel. "Anna froze. Too late," she whispered. "They found you!" The door burst open before Hainsworth could reach his pistol. A man in civilian clothes, armed with a suppressed handgun, stepped inside. His German was crisp, his voice cold. "Hands where I can see them," but before he could fire, Lotte lunged. The shot went wide, shattering a lamp. The room plunged into chaos and darkness. When the light returned, the attacker was gone. Leaving a trail of blood down the hall, Anna collapsed into a chair, trembling. "He wasn't German," she whispered. "That accent, it was English." Hainsworth met Lotte's eyes. The truth hung between them like smoke. Someone from their own side was willing to kill to keep Carthage buried. Lake Toplitz was unlike anything Captain Hainsworth had ever seen. A mirror of black glass, buried in the Austrian Alps, encircled by sheer cliffs and silent pines. No birds sang here. The locals said the lake had no bottom, only layers of dead water where light and life could not survive. It was late evening when the team arrived. Exhausted and shaken from the attack in Bad Ischl, Anna Weiss had insisted on coming with them, despite her wound. "If my husband died for what's in that lake," she said, "then I have a right to see it." The narrow road ended in forest. From there they hiked with ropes and lanterns, guided by a path that looked more like an animal trail. Rain soaked their uniforms and thunder rolled off the peaks. Hainsworth carried the blood-stained napkin from Merton's death in his coat pocket. Toplitzy, now the only thread left in the maze of Carthage. At the shoreline, they found the remains of a small wooden dock, half collapsed into the water. Nearby, hidden beneath brush, lay the rusted frame of a military truck. Its cargo bay was empty, but the ground beneath it was scattered with shattered crates and twisted metal bands, the remnants of something once sealed tight. Lotte knelt and brushed away mud. Stenciled faintly on a splintered plank was the Reich Eagle, and a word still visible in red paint. Morgenröte. The storm rose, wind tearing through the trees. They worked quickly, lowering a makeshift raft into the water. As they pushed off, the lake swallowed the sound of their paddles. The surface was unnaturally calm, like oil. Halfway across, their lantern flickered, then died. Only lightning illuminated the dark outlines of the cliffs. Hainsworth steadied the beam of his flashlight and saw what looked like a chain disappearing into the depths. They tied a rope to the raft and began to pull. Something heavy rose from below, a metal chest coated in silt. It broke the surface with a hollow groan. Together, they hauled it aboard, breathless, soaked, trembling. The lock was rusted shut, but one strike from the engineer's crowbar broke it loose. Inside were sealed metal canisters, each marked with the emblem of the Reich Chancellery. One had burst open, revealing water-damaged papers and reels of microfilm. Anna's hands shook as she unrolled the top sheet. Faded ink spelled words in German and English. Morgenröte, Part Third, financial collaborators. Names filled the page, industrial magnates. Politicians and bankers, some from Germany, others from Britain, Switzerland, even the United States. Hainsworth felt his stomach twist. The treasure wasn't gold. It was evidence, Lotta whispered. This could destroy everything. Before he could reply, a rifle crack echoed from the shore. The bullet tore through the raft's edge. More shots followed, precise, deliberate. Muzzle flashes flared in the darkness. "Down!" Hainsworth shouted, pushing the chest overboard to keep it from shattering. They plunged into the freezing water, the world erupting in gunfire and thunder. Beneath the surface, sound became pressure. Vision collapsed into darkness. He surfaced near the far bank, lungs burning. The attackers were searching the water with flashlights. Lotta and Anna were nowhere in sight. The raft drifted aimlessly, riddled with holes. Hainsworth crawled onto the muddy shore, clutching a single canister he had managed to save. Inside it, if it survived, was proof, and perhaps a death sentence. From across the lake, a voice called out in perfect English, "Captain Hainsworth! Hand it over! This isn't your war anymore." Then silence. Lightning struck the cliffs, illuminating the men on the opposite bank, wearing British uniforms. Dawn came grey and cold over the Alps. Mist curled across Lake Toplitz like breath over glass, veiling the scars of the night before. Captain Edward Hainsworth sat by a small fire on the forest's edge, soaked to the bone, the metal canister still clutched in his hands. His fingers were blue, his thoughts fragmented, flashes of gunfire, the faces of the men on the opposite shore, and Lotta's scream vanishing into the dark. He hadn't slept. Every sound in the woods made him reach for his pistol. When Anna Weiss finally stumbled out of the fog, drenched and pale, he almost shot her. She'd escaped the gunfire, but her eyes were hollow. "Lotta?" he asked. Anna only shook her head. The silence said the rest. They opened the canister by the fire, using a bayonet as a makeshift lever. Inside was a single roll of microfilm, still sealed in its protective sleeve. Hainsworth held it up to the light. Faint images flickered across it, columns of numbers, signatures, seals. But one name stood out, perfectly legible: Lord A. Pembroke, London, 1943, a British name. A peer of the realm, Anna exhaled sharply. "You see now why they're killing for it?" Hainsworth didn't answer. His mind was spinning. Operation Carthage, the secrecy, the silence from London, the refusal of support. It all made sense now. The gold was never the objective. It was the story, the myth, meant to hide something else: collaboration. The same banks funding both sides. The same money fueling war and reconstruction alike, and now he held proof of it in his hands. By midday, he and Anna made their way to an abandoned alpine cabin higher in the mountains. From there he managed to repair his field radio, tapping out a coded message to London. Objective secured. British involvement confirmed. Awaiting extraction. For hours there was only static. Then finally a voice, clipped, precise, unmistakably British. "Captain Hainsworth, this is command." "Well done, maintain position." Retrieval team inbound, but the voice wasn't from his handler. It was a man he had never heard before. Anna saw the color drain from his face. "What is it?" He looked at the radio. "They're not coming to rescue us," he said quietly. "They're coming to clean it up." The wind rose outside, rattling the window panes. In the distance, the low hum of engines echoed up the valley. Military trucks, maybe 2 or 3. They were out of time. Anna grabbed the canister and slipped it into her satchel. "Then we go to Switzerland," she said, "Zurich. If these documents name the banks, the truth belongs to the world, not the victors." They left the cabin before dusk, following an old smuggler's trail that wound through the forest toward the Swiss border. The mountains were merciless, the path narrow and slick. But for the first time, Hainsworth felt clarity, not about orders but purpose. By nightfall, headlights swept across the trees behind them. Voices, English and German, echoed through the woods. The pursuers were close. When they reached a ravine, the trail split. Anna insisted he take the canister. "You're the one they'll believe," she said. "I'm a ghost, a woman with no name. You have to tell them." He hesitated, then nodded. They embraced briefly, not as soldiers, not as spies, but as two people who had seen too much to ever go home unchanged. Moments later, they were separated by gunfire. Anna vanished into the darkness, drawing the pursuers away. Ainsworth crossed the ravine, stumbling down toward a river that led into Switzerland. The water was ice, but it carried him onward, away from the war that refused to end. 3 months later, in December 1945, Captain Ainsworth sat in a debriefing room in London. The canister lay on the table, sealed in brown paper, stamped Official Secrets Act. Across from him sat 2 men in tailored suits, one from the War Office, the other from the Treasury. "You did well, Captain," one of them said, expression unreadable. "But for the sake of national stability, what you found will remain classified, indefinitely." Ainsworth stared at the package. "People died for this. British people. Don't they deserve the truth?" The man smiled faintly. "The truth, Captain, is not always in the nation's best interest." He was dismissed an hour later. His service record was sealed, his mission erased. Officially, Operation Carthage never existed. That night, Ainsworth walked along the Thames, the city still in ruins but alive again with the sound of rebuilding. He looked out over the water and wondered how many secrets were buried beneath the surface. Not gold, but lies polished over time until they shone like honor. In his coat pocket, he carried a single frame of microfilm, the only piece he'd managed to keep. He never told anyone, not his superiors, not his family. But he wrote everything down in a small, leather-bound journal, locked away until his death in 1963. The journal was found decades later by his granddaughter, the same year Lake Toplitz was drained for a government investigation. What divers recovered from the mud matched his notes exactly: metal chests, microfilm reels and ledgers that had survived the cold. Silent depths for half a century. The files were quickly confiscated, sealed once more under national security. Officially, no Nazi gold was ever found, but the truth was never about gold. It was about silence, the silence of governments, of men who traded conscience for power, of a world too eager to move forward to ask what was left behind. And so, when the story of Hitler's gold is told, remember this: it was not greed that buried it, but fear. Soft piano begins to play. Archival images fade to black. Narrator VO, some truths are too heavy to lift and too dangerous to forget. If this story moved you, subscribe and tell us in the comments. Do you believe the gold was ever meant to be found? Or was it buried to hide something far more valuable?